And welcome to Rauta. When I'm filming this, it is the very second to last day of April, which is only one day before I'm going to see Hobbit play in a local big theater, which is a perfect excuse to talk about Burzum. After all, it was Tolkien who gave name to this very controversial band, but also one of the most excellent ones coming from 1990s especially. Now, as it also happens, I was in Norway during Easter for Inferno Festival, and obviously in Norway, as it is always, Norwegian bands are on the top of the game. You can see all those Norwegian band shirts all over, so it's kind of even hard to avoid even Burzum, as controversial as it might be. Now, the real reason obviously why I'm doing this video is that I decided early on, quite a few weeks before this one, to do Burzum worst to best. Like with my previous worst to best videos, most of them are about disbanded bands that have no activity whatsoever anymore, so it's a perfect time to talk about their albums and put them into certain kind of a ranking order, at least according to my opinion anyway. Now, Burzum is very controversial band for so many reasons. First of all, we all know that Christian Vikernes had the prison time for quite some time indeed. First of all, for the murder of Euronymous of Mayhem, but also his arsons of, churches burning down and all that stuff. There were more than that, but those are the main reasons, obviously. But even Vikernes didn't start with Burzum. I mean, much like a lot of the guys from late 80s or early 90s, a lot of Norwegian musicians as well had their thing going on with death metal, and Vikernes was no exception. We have lots of names to drop out, whether it's about Darkthrone guys or Immortal guys and so forth. Death metal was there before it all turned rather black. Obviously, Bathory was a big booster for this kind of band, and especially on early Burzum, you can really hear those Bathory vibes doing the thing. And that's when actually things started to roll pretty fast and sweet. But like so many bands during those times especially, and I wish it was true nowadays as well, Burzum started with demos. So it wasn't just like this and suddenly you have the first album out, demoing to material, creating them, and then eventually progressing into full albums and all that stuff. And what an interesting career Burzum or Vikernes made under the moniker Count Krishnak, also a Tolkien reference, during his career. 13 full albums, and then there are these things like EP demos, and of course they're kind of a compilation things, but they are beyond the point. The most important thing that happened was obviously the amount of albums, and they can be pretty much divided into 4 different eras. Now this is of course up for debate, but let's put it this way. The first few albums, purely black metal, the way it was in the early 1990s, and that's what got Burzum their reputation. Quality albums. Then came the so-called prison albums, a couple of synthesizer albums, during which it seems Vikernes wasn't exactly allowed to do guitar and all that stuff. Obviously drums and stuff like that doesn't belong to jail. But then there was this era when he made a comeback with a couple of metal albums, namely Bellows and Fallen. But after that, even though he could have continued with, doing more metal albums, he decided to go into more synthesizer music. We could even debate there is a 5th period when it goes even beyond that, kind of a post-black metal thing. And now when I say 13, I'm actually including From the Depths of Darkness, but that is kind of like off the books because, well, it's not a real album in the sense of being original material. I mean, these are all just basically re-recordings, so we can just drop it off from this kind of stuff. It's not a new album in that sense, but anyway, it's listed as here. Nonetheless, there are lots of material by Burzum, and things kept changing. One could say evolving, but much like bands like, say, Metallica, for instance, what you start with, basically, as a thrash metal in this case, didn't exactly end like doing the same. So things that happened to Dogthrone, things that happened to bands like Metallica also took place with Burzum. Different eras, different kind of music. And now it's my turn to put them into ranking I prefer. Now, I know there are lots of people who just can't stand Burzum at all, no matter which kind of era we're talking about. Maybe it's partially because Vikernes' personality and what he did and all that stuff. I'll get back to that before we start doing the ranking. And some people just worship everything. Basically, everything Burzum does is just like a golden Dutch kind of a thing. Now, I don't judge. Everybody likes whatever he or she likes. That's beside the point. But for me, Burzum is only like 1/3 of a good albums, maybe closer to 1/2 actually. And the rest I cannot really enjoy. Now, they are not absolutely worst ones. Some people really say that there are these worst albums. I don't think there are any bad albums, to be honest. Even the weakest ones are quite mediocre. But you just have to understand they are different genre, so obviously they are not very comparable with the metal albums. Now I'm kind of giving you a little bit of idea in which kind of order I'm going to put them, but I'll try to explain as we go on. But before we start ranking, I think one thing is worth mentioning, and that is about the Euronymous murder. Now I have always, not exactly figuring this like early 90s, but later years when I started to think about the murder of Euronymous and how it destroyed Mayhem, I actually ended up thinking it didn't only destroy Mayhem as it is. I mean, obviously Mayhem continued on, but without Euronymous, without Snorre Ruch, things were very, very different ways. Obviously, that changed the whole concept of Mayhem. One could even say it basically destroyed what Mayhem had built with, until that, with The Mysteries from Sathanas, one of the greatest black metal albums of all time. But basically, Vikernes kind of destroyed it. And that's kind of a very, very sad thing to do. But of course, he kind of destroyed Burzum along the way. I mean, after all, what happened after Philosophem and the likes, ended up in prison. It's not like Burzum kind of recovered from that. I'll get to that into as well. But lately, I actually figured he destroyed third band after all. Because that is Thorns, the band by Snorre Ruch. And the thing here is, when he was, kind of accomplice to this whole event, more or less, that obviously kind of halted what Thorns could have been. Thorns only made one good album, and I will do a classic review at some point because it's worth talking about. But so all these different bands, they kind of had their career not ending but changing dramatically. So I'm kind of mad about, mad about it, and I'm mad at Pari Vikernes. That being said, I obviously respect his career besides the crimes, whatever. You can think about one thing about the crime and one thing what he did in YouTube and all that stuff, having his own social media and all. But the music is still the music, and that stays unchanged. No matter what kind of thoughts he has later on, created and all that stuff. But, you can't really kill those timeless riffs and all. So that being said, very, very controversial band. And a band of a lot of infamy, but also to kind of a fame because, he was a charismatic person, kind of still is, and I guess he had the good looks. Girls drooled after him. And of course, having this gangster rap thing happening in Norway early 90s. Gangster rap like killing each other. That just happened with the, knife. Those guys probably didn't have too many handguns. And even if they did, it wasn't drive-by shooting kind of a thing. But the very same thing in a way happened, just a smaller scale, and that ended up changing the whole scene for a lot of years, but also boosted up the whole Norwegian scene. So we have to kind of be thankful for Vikernes and Burzum for the boost he kind of gave to whole Norwegian black metal scene. So even though he basically couldn't, reap what he saw with the whole thing, a lot of other bands got the boost from those arsons and from the murder and the whole mystery of, whole black metal. Now, I think a lot of people will be mad at me for saying these things or saying like, hey, you missed that fact or you changed that part of story, blah, blah, blah. But that it is how it is. Here we're mostly going to focus on Burzum's music and put that into my preferred worst to best. So, not going to go into more details. That would take a whole book and a lot of videos to talk about the whole Burzum thing here, but here I am to rank the whole thing. Now, like I said, because of these 4 or 5, depending how you count, different eras, Burzum music, it's kind of hard to figure out which goes first and which is the worst one and all that stuff. But I'll pick my least favorite Burzum because it's a very, very mediocre album in my opinion, and that is Doughty Boulders from 1997. As tragic as the story might be with the whole, okay, it seems like my network is not exactly working. There's a little bit of a slowness. Sorry for that. Backup's running and all that stuff. I didn't even realize it. Anyway, as tragic as this be, the death of Baldur and all those Viking stories, the music is quite, bad in a way. I mean, I grew up with 1980s, music, which usually meant, synthesizer music or metal in my case. And the music that happened in the synthesizer thing were just kind of something that is now referred as synthwave. I mean, a lot of those retro acts act up as if they were making music in the 1980s. And that music is so much better than what was going on with the so-called, nowadays that is, called Dungeon. Not only Morty's, not only Burzum, but a lot of other acts started experimenting with those Casios, my first Sony as the saying goes. And to be honest, I find Doughty Boulders very mediocre album in that sense. It reminds me of those late 80s and early 1990s video games, computer games, if you will, which had these kind of a sorry-ass beepings, but at least those guys were real composers. Well, technically speaking, Vikernes also. But what he did experiment with, this particular album is just something that I really can enjoy. Actually, it's from the very first minutes when it starts sounding like a kind of a duck, and things just get like, what the hell? So this is actually my least favorite album. I couldn't like it in the 90s, and I most certainly cannot enjoy it anymore. So I think it's the worst one. But then it gets complicated. Like I said, I'm gonna skip from the Depths of Darkness because it doesn't really belong here as a real album because it's a reissue. But the thing here is what happened after Bellows and Fallen, I think, comes into play. And there I have this kind of a, hard to choose which one is the least favorite after Doughty Boulders. It's not Hillshelf. Actually, I think that's quite a step up from what Doughty Boulders was happening. But the albums that happened after From the Depths of Darkness, Umskriptar, or Sol Austan, Manidastan, The Ways of Yore, should I say The Ways of Bore, those are all kind of very, very boring albums. Actually, I would say Sol Austan and The Ways of Yore are the next worst one. The reason is this. While especially The Ways of Yore kind of have almost this post-rockish thing, it's almost like Vikernes tried to experiment with a little bit of lounge music and like, what the hell, man? Because he's not really skilled at that, and including vocals a little bit here and there. I mean, these are the next worst ones. They absolutely have these very, very boring keyboard moments and things don't actually progress, but they don't really bring anything interesting in the game later on as well. They are very, very boring albums from the very beginning to the very end. So, to be honest, they could be both ways. Like, I don't really care which one is worst because they are not good. They are also very, very mediocre albums in that sense. Then I guess I would pick Umskiptar. The thing here is it starts rather nicely, but just starts falling down very, very quickly. If only the first few tracks were there, I would say it's pretty okay. Not exactly good, but better than mediocrity. But how it ends, it seems like it's a constant decline and it gets boring and boring and more boring towards the end, which makes, as a result, something that I still can't enjoy. I remember rating it like 6 out of 10 when it came out, and I did a written review of it, and I felt when I gave it the first spin, again that is, I felt like, hey, it's not that bad, but only to be illusioned by the very first tracks where that's actually a little bit better. And towards the end it goes, I was like, man, is this really boring? And yes, it is. So these 4 albums are basically the least favorites one. Doughty Boulders, Umskriptar, Sol Austan, Manifestan, The Ways of Yore. Now there comes a trick, which I didn't see coming. Is that actually Thulan Mysteries is a little bit better than those. Now it's an epic album in so many ways. First of all, it runs for more than, well, actually for 2 CDs. That is, it's almost 90 minutes of music. Well, more like a little bit less anyway. But the point here is, it actually, even though it's a very lengthy one and it has these spoken parts and actually way too much repetition, there's actually a little bit something that got me interested. First of all, the funny thing is, it was said that he did it for a kind of a role-playing soundtrack. Me, as a long-time role player, technically speaking, I was like, hey, it's going to be nice. But to be honest, if I play role-playing games, I go for soundtrack music or something more like real ambient. I don't want these spoken parts like, and there was this key, and the password, where's my name, kind of thing. And I'm like, what the hell, man? Shut the up, you know. Thing here is, there are a little bit interesting parts here and there. It's just kind of a drag because it's so lengthy. Now, if you would remove roughly 1/3, maybe half of it, it would be actually pretty nice, especially if you remove the ones with all these spoken word parts. I don't know what made him think that they are really a good idea, but there it is. Now, Thulan Mysteries is a little bit a step up from the mediocrity he had for like 4 albums. Not exactly a good one, but something like more tolerable one, if you will. And then we go back to Hilskjalf, which is a big step up from Dowdy Ballers. It's way more atmospheric, it's kind of a darker, and it seems like suddenly Vikernes had, figured out how to play keyboards in prison. I don't know how in reality it went, but, it's just so much better. Actually, they're pretty cool ideas that could work very, very nicely as guitar riffs, if it was made with guitars and drums and all that stuff. But unfortunately, it's not. But definitely more atmospheric parts, so it is actually how I remembered it to be from the 90s. A lot better than Dowdy Ballers, but still not exactly a good album. It's not something that I need to own because it's not that good. So all these non-metallic albums can go to the trash bin, all I care. I know they're important to some people, and that's fine. If you like them, like them. Don't hate me for not liking them, because for me they're useless. If I want to go for a instrumental soundtrack kind of a music or ambience, I go for real dark ambient, or I go for soundtracks. I don't need some copycat keyboard 1990s, Amiga 500 kind of a music. Those soundtracks are better than what Burzum and other dudes doing the so-called dungeon synth ever did. That's my opinion anyway. Hate me for that if you need, I don't really care. But there it gets interesting because the rest of the albums are so much better. They're actually good ones which I need to own. That includes Burzum, the self-titled ones, Det som en gång var, Hvis Lyset Tar Oss, Philosophem, and Belus and Fallen. I don't know why I started to speak like Norwegian. Anyway, the thing here is, these are different phases. Belus and Fallen, after the so-called prison albums, and the, four first ones came before that. And now it gets tricky, because this is not exactly super surprising, but it's not totally expected as well either, I think. Now, a lot of people say Belus was the last good album by Burzum, and I have to disagree there. I know I'm not the only one saying Fallen is actually pretty good of an album. I rated it something like 8 out of 10, or maybe 8.5 out of 10 actually, back to when it was released. I wouldn't go 8.5 anymore though. I would say it's 8 out of 10. It's good, but there are parts where it seems like a little bit off, like some of the vocals, which are totally different kind of style than what, Vikernes was doing with the early Burzum ones. I like them, but I don't like them that much. And I think it's clear that the vocals have kind of a weakened so much. Different style, I get it, but still, they could have been a lot better. Overall, still pretty good of an album, and it's not too lengthy with its 47 and then some. So, a good one, and it's kind of like brother to Belus, which is, in my opinion, clearly a lot better. Something that I rated 8.5 back in the days, and that's why I don't really understand how come Fallen is rated a little bit better here in Metal Archives as well. But, what do you know? Different opinions, and that's what matters. And this is where it gets unexpected, I guess. I mean, I loved early Burzum. It was one of those bands that I started to like in the late or mid-late 90s when I heard it. And I guess I should like Det som en gång var a little bit more than I actually do. Now, it's a good album, but it's not exactly that good of an album. I mean, it has nice ideas, and there are songs like, Lost Wisdom and all that stuff, but to be honest, I never got to like it that much. There are like these weird riffs which put me a little bit off. I mean, we're clearly talking about a good album, but to separate this from greatness are the parts where some of those riffs are like, why? I mean, I love Burzum's vocals. They're screamy and they're inhumane and they're like, this orc worship. Orcs from the Tolkien kind of worship. They're like as if, it was orcs singing, metal tunes. So I kind of like them. And the raw production is still very crisp and clear, but also very, very likable. So it's a good album, but falls between Bellows and Fallen for me. And there is where we go back to the 2010s of Burzum, because I have to mention Bellows here now. And this is indeed, in my opinion, one of the best ones by Burzum. It is that good that it's actually able to challenge not only that En Song Var, but even the ones that, came early on. But can't really beat them. But this is something that I think is often overlooked and as such, I guess, underrated. I think it's a really, really good black metal album, something that I never expected Burzum to do. I had high expectations. I was doing reviews back in the days already, and when it came out, I was like, I don't know what to expect, really. And then it came to me as a surprise. It's so good. It wasn't only this Burzum fanboy things, because after all, I still feel the same thing after, more than 10 years after its release. So I gotta say, positive surprise back then and still. And that's where we head to the top 3 of Burzum albums. Now, this probably doesn't come as a surprise that albums as the debut, and I kind of account as a EP because it's often, put into the same box with the debut album. And then we have Hvis Lyset Tar Oss and Philosophem. And my number 3 in the list, the top list that is Burzum debut album. Now, there's a lot of really good songs on this album. Whether we're talking about The Crying Orc or a little bit better like War or Spell of Destruction or, Lord of the Zip. This is just really, really strong and good album. One of those cornerstone albums of Norwegian black metal. And it's kind of a timeless, really. I mean, there are no weak moments. There are a little bit of those same weird moments which are present with Dead Som En Gang Var. But this is, in my opinion, so much better. Especially when you pair it with Aske, it just gets even better than that. So obviously it's one of my favorites. And it's only beaten by these 2 albums for the reasons I'm gonna mention. And now it gets tricky. Which one is the best? Hvis Lyset Tar Oss or Philosophem? Because this could actually go 2 ways. But my second best is Philosophem. And the reason is this. It has this big amount of ambience presented here. And while I do like that kind of ambient, I mean, this is, in my opinion, the best keyboard stuff which Burzum ever did, along with the track Tom Head on Hvis Lyset Tar Oss. But it isn't enough good to just beat Hvis Lyset Tar in this game, which is the best album by Burzum ever. One of the best Norwegian albums ever. But these first songs on this album, Burzum, Jesu Død, and Beholding the Daughters of the Firmament, I mean, these are the tracks which are among the best Burzum ever did. So if it was only these ones, or if there was more track like this instead of these, ambient ones, this would be my favorite Burzum album. Whenever I go back to this, I was like, fuck, this is so good. This is among the very best of Norwegian black metal. But because of these later tracks, and especially how it dominates, I mean, these are more than lion's share of this album, it really can't beat the best album by weakness. And that is, of course, like I said, Hvis Lyset Tar Oss. Now, this runs only for 45 minutes, only and only. But of that time, Tom Head takes 14 minutes and then some. So it's more like 30 minutes of really, really good black metal that makes Hvis Lyset Tar Oss so goddamn good. But it's also because of Tom Head, because like I said, it's one of the best ambient tracks Vikernes ever did. So it's kind of a shame that he couldn't pull off these ideas like Tom Head and those Philosophem ambient tracks when he was in prison. And it's really a shame, because if he was doing that, maybe I would just love Dowdy Balders and Heel Shelf and those ones that came after Bellows and Fallen. But Hvis Lyset Tar Oss is, in a way, near perfect black metal album. It has good production, good vocals, totally nailing it with the atmosphere. It just basically has everything. It could be Catcher. I'm talking about you, the Mysteries, Tom Satanas. I'm talking about you there in the night side eclipse and those gods known as Transylvanian Hunger and Under a Funeral Moon. Apart from that, well, I don't know if there are real challengers in Norwegian black metal. Yes, I actually do, but, still, Hvis Lyset Tar Oss is beating the most of them. Whether I'm talking about my favorite Immortal albums or Urgehal or, a lot of Norwegian bands. Hvis Lyset Tar Oss is on the top of the game. Maybe some early Gorgoroth are roughly the same level. Maybe a little bit better. I don't know. I kind of have to revisit that for, clear my mind and figure out that. But still, like I said, this is one of the best black metal albums of Norwegians. One of the best black metal ever, exactly. But then it gets harder than just to fit top 5. And that's it. I think Burzum made a lot of good albums. It's not like most bands can create even 3 good albums, not to mention 6, which in my opinion, that's what happened with Burzum. The rest of the other half of that 12 albums, if we remove From the Depths of Darkness away, it's like the rest are shite. You can put it in the trash bin. The rest, the other half, is just really, really good. So, what a career. Can't be really sorry that Vikernes ended up Burzum career after so many albums, but I just feel like he could have stopped it From the Depths of Darkness and leave these synthesizer albums or post-black metal albums, whatever you want to call them, or post-rock actually is more accurate on that, could have been just like not do them. But I get it. He's an artist. He wanted to continue with his passion and all that stuff, so that's why he wanted to do them. Now, that being said, I strongly recommend people to go through whole Burzum discography, even the weaker ones, just to get in comparison. I did it twice. The first time from the first one to the very last one, and then I did vice versa. It was quite a ride, and the second ride was better because then I was always going towards the good stuff instead of the worst ones. Definitely an interesting, definitely a controversial band, and what can I say? Really great stuff out there, and Burzum will always be one of those bands. No matter how toxic the person behind the band might be, the real legacy lies with his early albums, and they are still very much listening to. So, all hail Burzum, yes indeed, and tomorrow, towards Hobbit I go. See you soon with more videos like this coming your way. If you like it, subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. And of course, I'm looking forward to hear your ranking for Burzum albums, or if you don't like the band at all, that would be also interesting to hear, and the reasons, whatnot. Take care and see you soon with more Rauta content coming away.